Hello, so we're continuing in chapter 4 in the book. The scholarship in chapter 4 is an article by Helene Foley called A Question of Origins. And Foley makes the point that myth is used to reinforce social norms. So this chapter and the next chapter are going to take opposing views on does myth challenge social norms or does it reinforce social norms? So Foley is taking the point that the Eleusinian Mysteries and Homeric Hymn number 2 to Demeter, that one of their primary purposes is actually to reinforce the social norm, specifically of marriage. Now, what she's doing in this piece is she's answering what had been goddess feminism. There had been in the 50s and then 60s, there had been this rash of scholarship that came out that argued that prior to the Indo-European invasion, Greece had been a matriarchal society. They worshipped the great goddess figure, and that things were more equitable. But then the warrior Indo-Europeans came in. They had a sky god. It was a very patriarchal society, and that upended that whole system. And some of those scholars argue that Homeric Hymn number 2, among other things, challenges the patriarchal norm of marriage because of the way it's sort of handled in the poem. Foley is sympathetic to the feminist project, but she says that a lot of the scholarship in the 50s and 60s was not done as thoroughly and as rigorously as it ought to have been. And so she says, the evidence simply isn't there for their reading. And she says you can actually read Homeric Hymn number 2 as a document that is reinforcing the social norm. I think that that's probably also an overstatement. It does, marriage does come out as sort of winning, but, we still see that it's pretty brutal on the women, the whole marriage thing, that the daughter is sort of almost like kidnapped by the groom. And in this particular poem, that is what happens. Support or, attack, I'm not exactly sure. But at any rate, Foley is herself a feminist author. And her main point is some of the stuff that was done in the 50s and 60s actually went overboard and didn't have the evidence to support their conclusions. The comparative reading is selections from a poem called In the Desert by the Early Grass. This is a Sumerian poem. So we're talking about Mesopotamia. That comes originally from 1750 BCE. I think the text as we have it may be later than that. The text is on clay tablets, and those clay tablets are damaged, so there are gaps that are marked in the text by either a reconstruction in square brackets where the scholar knows what should be there and fills it in, but it's in square brackets because we don't actually have the thing there. There is a gap there. And then where we can't be sure what went in there, there are 3 dots inside a square bracket. Or there's the words, a lacuna exists, meaning there's a gap here of, in some cases, maybe several pages. Like Homeric Hymn number 2 to Demeter, it is about a mother yearning for her dead child. This particular poem has a lot of repetition, so this seems to be a feature of the poetry from Sumeria. As you're reading the poem, one of the things, it's got nice marginal comments which help you figure out what's going on, because if you just read the text by itself, you're probably going to be saying, "What? I don't know what's going on." So look at those marginal things. That's the scholar, the translator, basically giving you a hint. It seems to me, and I don't know how this would have been performed, but it would have been a performance piece. It would not have been just a clay tablet. My guess is that there were maybe 2 soloists two singers playing the mother and the son who's dead, so the ghost of the son. And then there would have been a narrator, which might have been provided by a chorus. So I'm thinking there might have been like a chorus or a choir performing this with then two standout people who represent the two main characters. I don't know that for a fact, but it sort of, that's the way it feels to me as I read it, that would be the way if I were to, mount a production of this. I wouldn't have a single singer or a chorus singing it. I would have them, but with soloists representing the two main characters. The Nachleben for chapter 4 are 3 poems about Persephone. They're by 3 American poets, Rita Dove, Rachel Zucker, and Allison Townsend. They give voice to Persephone. So one of the things, if in Homeric hymn number 2, in one sense it's all about the kidnapping of Persephone, but Persephone gets no lines. Zeus gets lines, Hades indirectly gets lines, and Demeter, gets a lot of lines, but Persephone is, there's a report of her saying something to her mom. She actually, we get one line or two from her, but we don't really get her perspective in this story. And these poems sort of try to address that. What would have been like to be Persephone? Now, I have to give you a warning. The Rita Dove poem, Rita Dove was, when she was studying in Paris, she was also served as an artist model, and she was raped by an artist who was painting her, and so her take on the Persephone thing is she sees it very much as a violent rape. So if that's going to really gross you out and you can't handle it, I understand. I'm just giving you the warning. So Rita Dove would be, of the poems, the one to avoid if that's going to trigger something. I really don't want that to happen. The Zucker poem and the Townsend poem both sort of assume that being an American in the 20th century is sort of different than being an ancient Greek maiden. And in this particular case, Zucker's argument is she sort of likes the bad boy. So she sort of actually likes being Hades' wife. And she doesn't really appreciate her mother, whom she sees as a smothering presence. So that sort of like upends what we see in Homeric hymn number 2, but it's not out of keeping with what's in Homeric hymn number 2, right? I mean, Demeter is pretty much dogged to get her daughter back, and she is determined to see the whole situation as, Hades and Zeus did this to my daughter, rather than my daughter may want to get married, right? So even if the way it's done raises questions, Zucker's point is, this is not uncommon, right? Teenage girls may go out on dates, may have sex, earlier maybe than they should, because it's been sort of forbidden, and and they can't stand their mother for a while, and they're acting out. So Zucker takes that sort of position. Townsend's is a little bit like that, but in her story, it's when she was a teenager, she went to Woodstock. Her mother, I think, had died, and so she was basically a motherless teen girl trying to find herself. But again, this one sort of suggests much more agency on Persephone's part than we get in Homeric hymn number 2, where she's just the victim. All right, then we're going to move into chapter 5. Chapter 5 deals with Aphrodite primarily. There's a little bit about Ares, there's a little bit about Hephaestus, and there's a little bit about, I think, Pan in the chapter. But Aphrodite is primarily the figure. About Eros. Eros is also in there as a minor figure. Now, Aphrodite is viewed by the Greeks often as a dangerous figure. So love, here we're talking about erotic love, sexual love, is not seen as a good thing to a stable marriage, right? A stable marriage is a marriage that's been arranged, and you're building a life together, and passion doesn't always work that way, right? Sometimes passion can be quite destructive. The So there's not this love and marriage go together as like a horse and carriage. The Greeks did not buy that. She makes an allusion to the love triangle of Ares, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus. And if you look that up, it's in Odyssey Book 8, we get that story told. Odysseus is at a banquet, and a singer is telling the story of this love affair. So Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus. Now, why is she married to Hephaestus? She's married to Hephaestus because Hephaestus can do things for the gods. So this is basically a package deal. This is Zeus, paying off Hephaestus or arranging this marriage because of what Hephaestus can do for him and for the other gods. Love is not part of it. But as often happens in like ancient literature and in medieval literature and in Renaissance literature and in modern literature, you often have a young wife married to a successful person. Hephaestus is a successful blacksmith. He's a great creative figure. But he's perceived as an older guy, right? He's older, he's lame, so he's not super healthy. And the younger woman may be married to this successful guy, but then she sees some young guy who's pretty hot, and she has an affair with that guy, right? There's tons of those. I mean, that's a very common love triangle setup, and we get it here with Ares. And Aphrodite and Ares actually have kids. Fear and Dread, who are children of Ares and Aphrodite, as is Harmonia. It's sort of interesting that we get these kids from love and war combined, and Hephaestus and Aphrodite do not have children together. But that story is worth doing, and it's really too bad that she did not include it because it is a nice little story. And then just the big lit work in chapter 5, the beginning, is Homeric hymn number 5 to Aphrodite. This is another long Homeric hymn like Homeric hymn number 2. In it, Zeus forces Aphrodite to mate with Anchises, who is a Trojan prince. So the deal is that Aphrodite can make gods fall in love with mortals, right? And this is a common theme in Greek myth, right? At the end of Hesiod's Theogony, we've got a list of heroes that are the children of Zeus and some mortal woman, and then we get a list of heroes who are the sons of goddesses who mated with mortals, right? So this is a common sort of theme, and Zeus is the one who has the most kids by mortal women of any of the gods. And in the poem, the suggestion is that Aphrodite goes around bragging that she never has mated with a mortal, but all these other gods can't keep it in their pants, and they're hopping into bed with mortals all over the place. And Zeus, as the primary one, of course, is really angry because, think of his reputation, right? Who's in charge of Mount Olympus? Is it him or is it Aphrodite? Well, if Aphrodite can make him fall in love with mortal women and young men and so forth, well, then it sounds like he's not in charge, right? It sounds like he's sort of a loose cannon. So he's upset about that, and he's determined to get revenge, and so he makes her fall in love, or makes her want to mate at least, with Anchises. Now, there's no force as such. My guess is, and we don't find out exactly what the mechanic is, how does Zeus make this happen? If Zeus can make her fall in love, why can't Zeus resist her? Right? I mean, it seems like that would go together, but that's not addressed in the poem. The likelihood is that he basically tells Aphrodite that she has to give herself the whammy and fall in love with this mortal, Anchises, who's in the royal family at Troy. And what happens ultimately is that Aphrodite will give birth to a hero son named Aeneas. And Aeneas, of course, is going to be important for us later in the term because we're going to be reading the Aeneid, which is about Aeneas, right? And how Aeneas survived the fall of Troy and came to the west to found a settlement in Italy that would ultimately lead to Rome, right? So this is what the Romans believed was, in the literature that the Romans knew, there were two great powers, the Greeks and the Trojans. Well, the Romans know they're not Greeks, so that would mean as great a people as the Romans are, they must have come from somewhere. They must have come from Trojan stock, right? So that's sort of how that connection gets made. So it's a comic poem. It's not like yuck, yuck, yuck. You're going to laugh all the way. But it's basically sort of like a little sex comedy poem. And pay attention especially to the reactions of Anchises to Aphrodite when he first sees her and thinks she's a goddess, but doesn't want to go to bed with her, because if you go to bed with a goddess and you're a mortal man, usually what happens is you become impotent. And so he doesn't want that. He wants to keep the plumbing in working order. But then, she tricks him. They go to bed because she's beautiful. And of course, he's like, well, if you're not a goddess, then I guess we're going to hop into the hay right away. They have sex. And the next morning, she then wakes him up and then shows herself as Aphrodite in her goddess splendor. And he's he almost has a heart attack. Because he said, oh my God, I've slept with a goddess and now what's going to happen to me? So there are some funny moments in it. Again, not funny sort of yuck yuck, but it is meant to be sort of a comic poem. So that's the stuff for this week. Some of the stuff that you should focus on. I hope you sort of enjoy it. I mean, the poem in the desert is going to be strange. It's going to seem a lot different than the other stuff that we've read. Greek literature has a narrative line rather like Western literature, so we can sort of follow it. But Middle Eastern poetry, not always so much. Sometimes it can be quite dense and to us like opaque. So good luck with that. Beware of the Rita Dove poem if that's going to be an issue for you, because I really don't want to trigger some sort of incident for anyone. And enjoy the Homeric hymn number 5, because I think it's meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to put a smile on your face.